Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sustaining the Herd, brought to you by Sechi Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. I'm your host, Brock Vitek, as always, joined by my co-host, Andrew Wadle. We're excited to be back with you today for another great episode. For all of our returning listeners, thank you for choosing to come back. And for all of our new listeners, we hope you find value in today's episode as we're joined by a special guest to talk about sustainability from the perspective of an agricultural lending institution. With that being said, we have our guest, Myriah Johnson, with us today. Myriah is the Vice President of Corporate Sustainability with Farm Credit Services of America, Frontier Farm Credit, and Ag Country Farm Credit Services. Myriah, welcome. Would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Brock, and thank you, Andrew. I'm excited to be joining y'all today. So a little bit of background about myself. I grew up on a small grains and cattle operation in north central Oklahoma. That's really where I got my foundation and start, is just working out there alongside my parents and my brother. I went to Oklahoma State, which was just a hop and a skip down the road, and got a degree in agricultural economics, and then went on to Texas A&M and got a master's in agricultural economics and a PhD in animal science. So I've really been in the ag industry for about as long as I can remember. It's been a bit of a winding path. It wasn't always a straight shot, because once I got into some of those grad degrees, I really had the idea that I wanted to combine those fields between ag econ and animal science. And so really that lent itself to a lot of the sustainability element today. And even when I was in that PhD, the way I paid for it and worked my way through was, you might find this surprising, is in algae. So about 10 or 15 years ago, there was a big push around biofuels. Not that there's not push around biofuels these days still, but it was around algae at that time. And so I worked on a grant that we had with the Department of Energy doing economic sustainability analysis, essentially, for algae biofuels. And so I learned a lot from that. And so while that wasn't specifically in what I, would have considered the traditional ag industry that I grew up in, it really gave me some good insight and some good learnings that then I've been able to translate over time into the work that I do even today. And so finished my degrees there at Texas A&M, and again, even looked at sustainability components in my research for my doctoral degree, so trade-offs between production and economics, how you balance these different areas of sustainability. I took a job at the Noble Research Institute, which is a research and consulting organization in South Central Oklahoma. Worked there with predominantly cow producers, but worked with producers every day around their economics of their operation, but also looking at the different aspects around production of operation. And then we were heavily involved in an organization called the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. I got really interested in it, and I kept bugging my boss at the time, can I go? Can I come along? He finally relented, and I got involved and was able to learn a lot being at those meetings, but also helping to contribute information, really highlight how important the economic sustainability aspect is in the overall sustainability conversation. And USRSB was pretty new at the time. They started in 2015, and it was about 2017 or so when I showed up. And so there was a group of folks that said, you know what, we really need to put to the test the things that we're putting down on paper, right, about sustainability, what we call them high priority indicators are for the industry. And they said, let's put together a pilot project. Let's take this all the way through the supply chain, see if we can trace this, and what does it look like when we put this into application. So I really got to cut my teeth on that, worked on a lot of different aspects in that project, whether it was working with the cow-calf folks that we worked with through Noble every day, sourcing cattle. So, that procurement side, pricing, what does a premium look like, helping to figure that out, what's fair, between the cow-calf and the feedlot as we're working on this project together. A lot of data collection, looking at research, investigating some different health issues that we saw. So really was just in the middle of it all the way through and learned so much from that project. And then a few years later, there came an opportunity to apply to lead the research, sustainability research role at NCBA, specifically on the beef checkoff side. So NCBA, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And hope most are familiar with the dollar per head that goes towards the beef checkoff, which, all of that work goes towards promoting the beef industry, right? Helping us advance, increasing consumer demand. So led that sustainability research program there in the beef checkoff just short of a couple of years. And so again, I think, Andrew, Brock, you both probably have felt this over time. Sustainability, while it's evolved, right? I mean, it really started a lot on the environmental side, but I think there's really been a recognition, right, around the economic and even that social side. And we can get hung up on, what exactly do we mean when we're talking about environmental or economic or social. But there's just a lot more attention that's paid to all three areas today, which I think is really positive because you have to have all of those things, right? It has to be good for quality of life and the people working in it. And we have to make some money, otherwise we're not going to be in business. But we've also got to take care of our land and our animals. Those are all pretty common sense, straightforward things I think that most people can get behind. So led that program for a couple of years, really expanded those areas of research. That program had started not all that long ago, really 10 or 15 years ago now at this point. But again, starting in that environmental, but really, instead of lowering the amount of environmental research we did, we really grew the pie. That's what we talked about. We grew the pie. So we're doing just as much environmental research, but also tying in and doing research around those economic sides and those social sides. And so after I'd been there, I had the opportunity to jump on board with a carbon startup company. I'd never thought I would be in the startup world. I was kind of curious about it. What would that be like? So went to work. That was a short stint working for a carbon startup that was focused on the rangeland side. And then actually had an old colleague, an old industry contact that was working for Farm Credit Services of America at the time. And he called me and he said, hey, Farm Credit's getting into this sustainability thing. They're creating a position. And I think you would be great. I've already talked to them about you at this point. You need to apply. And I was going, I don't know about this, because starting something new, starting something from scratch. But, obviously I made the jump. I've been with Farm Credit Services of America now for about 2.5 years. Started our sustainability program, have grown it quite a bit since that inception. And it's a lot of fun, right? In kind of my early life, I focused a lot on the beef cattle industry, but now I'm honing my skills and learning even more because, of course, Farm Credit doesn't serve just the beef cattle industry. It also serves dairy, poultry, pork, all of the cropping side. Whether that's potatoes or it's, corn and beans, or we talk about cover crops, just a number of things. So really trying to stay up and cover the breadth on all of those things. So most of the time I feel like I'm running about 2 miles wide and an inch deep on a lot of things because sustainability often feels like a big catch-all. It's a big umbrella sometimes with all the topics that fall in it. But it's been a lot of fun and I'm really excited for where we have the potential to head.
Well, it sure seems like you're singing off the same hymn sheet as us because we talk all the time about how sustainability is just all these things. It's economic, it's social, it's land and water, and it sounds like you've really covered the waterfront. And it's funny. I think the algae thing is really interesting because it makes me think about when I was a kid and you'd be turning rocks over in a stream or something, and you see that little swirl. It looks like, hey, how did oil get here? And it's algae doing its thing. So that just you're bringing back memories.
Yeah.
But so that's really interesting how you got there to Farm Credit. And so can you just give us a sense for what is Farm Credit? What is Farm Credit Services of America, and how do you differ from other commercial lending institutions?
Sure. I think sometimes I take for granted, knowing about Farm Credit just because I grew up knowing about it. But Farm Credit is a financial institution. So most producers, most of us in agriculture, we don't have enough money sitting in the bank. We need to go borrow some money, right? Sometimes to help our operation, cover cover those expenses, crops while they're in the ground, cattle while they're growing, until we get that payday, right? Because that payday only comes usually about once a year. So Farm Credit serves as that financial institution to provide those loans to farmers and ranchers. The interesting and unique aspect about Farm Credit and how we differ from other commercial lending institutions is we are actually a cooperative. So that means that we are owned by our borrowers, which really gives us, I think, I believe, a different purview, right? We're not in it to make money for somebody else. We're in it for our borrowers. And also that means that our borrowers, reap the returns with us. So when we have, money that we make, right, ultimately that goes back out the door in the form of a patronage. Hopefully, right, at the end of the year, if we've had a good, successful year, we're able to return that money, and we really only hold back what we need to operate and to be financially sound. So we're not making anything above and beyond. We're just in it with our borrowers, with those farmers and ranchers. So I think that gives us some pretty neat motivations of who we're working for and working with every day.
And just to follow up to that, how is Farm Credit Services linked with the government?
So the Farm Credit System, which the Farm Credit System spans the entire U.S., we are what is considered a government-sponsored entity. So really being that GSE, while we do have that backing of the federal government, we do operate in a very sound way and have really not had to rely on the government much to make sure that we are sound. We manage that very well. But we do have a regulatory body called the Farm Credit Administration that oversees and makes sure that we remain sound for all of our borrowers. And probably one thing that I didn't touch on, and I think sometimes the name of our association can be a little bit misleading in the fact that we say Farm Credit Services of America. There is actually just under 60 farm credit institutions or associations across the United States, and we each have a different loan servicing area. So for Farm Credit Services of America, we provide lending into Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, and Wyoming.
Excellent.
So Myriah, thanks for the introduction, both to yourself and to Farm Credit. As we dive deeper into the sustainability conversation here, why does Farm Credit Services of America care about sustainability?
Farm Credit Services of America cares about sustainability because it impacts our borrowers, right? We talked about the fact that we're a cooperative. And so we have those different motivations, right? And so sustainability is important to our borrowers, to our customers. And so it's important to us. It's important that we help our customers. A lot of our customers look at their loan officer, right? And that's a trusted financial advisor. And we had several customers who were asking their loan officer, can you help me understand the sustainability space? There's a ton going on in it. It's hard to, make sense of it all. It moves and shifts so fast. I don't even know where to get started in this. So that's one element of it, right? But there's also sort of, I would say, a back end element where the farm credit system at large, all the farm credits, we get our money that we loan out by selling bonds. And so the buyers of our bonds are ultimately Wall Street investors. And so they have, a lot of interest and care into who they're buying these bonds from, right? Wanting to make sure that we're sound, and they're asking questions about sustainability. And so we want to be able to hold those conversations with them, provide the reassurance, right, that we and our customers are engaged in this space and are doing the right things, because that can impact our cost of capital, right? And nobody loves higher interest rates. And so, trying to make sure that we're doing a good job on that side as well. So there's really that two sides to this, probably about why do we care about it. And so that's, even before I started, right, they saw that need. And so that's when Farm Credit Services America went into looking in this area and thinking about what is our role and what should we be doing in this area. And went through all of that ultimately before I was ever hired and brought on.
It's really interesting. Brock and I talk about relating things to the people in town, so to speak. That is the people who aren't familiar with agriculture and animal agriculture. And I think that the next level of that is telling this story or how important sustainability is to the people in Wall Street, because that's like another step up, in terms of who needs to or who is paying attention to the sustainability story. That's really important.
Right. And, I think Andrew has been really my purview. And I mean, in the associations, right? That I'm going to lean in to the power of the cooperative, right? And so we have issued a sustainability report, 2 of them now, working on our third one. And so in those, we have decided that we're going to dedicate essentially half of that report to being focused on our customers and telling the stories of our customers. And not that we certainly don't try to paint everything as rainbows and unicorns, right? Like sustainability is not that. So we try to be very real and talk about the challenges associated with sustainability that our customers have faced, but put those stories together in our sustainability report, because a lot of times I think we know as individual operators that's the last time or the last thing you have time to do, right? Is to go out and to tell that story to the people in town, let alone the people on Wall Street or the legislature or wherever it may be. But how can we, as a cooperative, bring those voices together and make them more powerful and to uplift those stories? And so those stories, they do get used on Wall Street, and we get told that all the time. That they really lean on our sustainability report as that way to have that connection point with those investors.
And Myriah, thanks for sharing about why sustainability is important to the association. What does it look like to carry out that mission of promoting sustainability? What's the tactical side of that look like?
Yeah, so the tactical side, the associations, our 3 focus areas in sustainability are education, engagement, and enablement. And so those it can be pretty wide open, right? But within education, building out and being a resource for both our teammates, our employees, so that way our frontline officers are better equipped to have conversations with their customers around sustainability, but also putting together information and resources around sustainability for our customers. So that way, in all of this competing din of voices out of there, and and leaning on that trusted advisor relationship, we can help them sort through all of that. And so that's a lot to work through. We've talked about and we've tried some different things, doing podcasts, doing webinars, putting print information out there or in a newsletter and flyers that are in local offices on different topics. And so as an example, one of the things that we recently did is a lot of our customers are getting questions around carbon intensity scores, 45Z. And so we stood up rather quickly in an educational event for our teammates on that. We did lean on some outside knowledge and speakers and bring them in, but had a tremendous response from our teammates. And they were looking for that knowledge. And so we try to be timely on those topics that are relevant, that are happening out there in the field. In another area, which really overlaps a little bit between some of this educational piece and into the enablement. In all of these 3 areas, none of them stand alone. There's just like sustainability, right? They cross over a lot. But in enablement, in that educational piece, we've worked with customers who are looking to do some energy efficiency pieces. So there's the Rural Energy for America program through the government, through the Rural Development Office, where they will provide grants to producers who are in ag, over 50% of that's where the revenue comes from, that they can get these grants for energy efficiency upgrades. And so those can be things like grain bin dryers, or where we've especially seen has been solar panels. So not solar panel farms, but putting solar panels on, say, your hog barn. And a lot of times that grant money needs to still be paired with a loan. And so that's where we step in. And so we made the effort to put some information out there. Again, do a video for our teammates where we had one of our relationship managers who had worked on this specifically with a customer talk about it. We brought that customer in. They talked about the process. What are the the different things that needed help with? We put information together for our teammates on how you would go through and execute that, and then have turned that into flyer information that now our loan officers can take out into the field with them if they have a customer who might be the right fit and is looking for that sort of thing. And so helping, enabling our customers to take advantage of these types of opportunities that are the right fit for their operation and where they choose to engage. And then that last area of engagement, I really think of that as being external engagement, right? We've talked about there are lots of folks that are interested in sustainability and what farm credit is doing. And so sometimes that looks like talking to, other corporate companies, other companies within the agribusiness food supply chain. They're curious about what we're doing, or they want to better understanding how financing for sustainability works. So talking to them about that. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. That's something that Farm Credit of Services of America is engaged in. We want to support those industry efforts on sustainability because we're certainly not here to set the rules on what sustainability looks like, but we want those to be industry-led, producer-led, and so supporting those organizations that are doing that. So not only U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, there's also a roundtable for poultry and eggs, field to market. There's all of that we want to support. We've also been, involved on. There's been a lot of these climate smart commodity grants come out over the past couple of years, and we serve as an advisor to a couple of those programs. So specifically, the Farmers for Soil Health program, we serve on an advisory board for that. So, as well as another one through the Conservation Technology Information Center, or CTIC. And their building is going to be pretty neat. They call it the Connector app, where a producer can go in. So Brock, you might look it up and you might say, I live in Nebraska and, beef feedlot. What are the opportunities that are available to me? Or you might enter in, here are a few things that I might be interested in relative to sustainability. Which of the climate smart commodity grants would be a fit? And it'll populate that for you. So it really does a lot of that work to kind of narrow down, and so you don't have to go through all that mess yourself. So again, sometimes our customers, our borrowers may not see what we're doing every single day, but we're also trying to work on the back end of a lot of things to help make things better, make it easier, bring things forward, bring forward opportunities, certainly economic opportunities at the farm and ranch level for our customers.
Myriah, does that engagement ever involve, how should we say, the opposition?
Certainly, it does. There are there's opposition out there. And I would say, we haven't probably engaged with anybody that's been hateful, right? Or coming to shut us down. But there are people who have maybe some opinions on how we should operate, or especially as a financial institution related to ag, how we should be operating. And so, that's a big part of my job too. And there's some days that, I feel maybe a little bit like a mediator, and I'm not sure I was trained to be a mediator, but just really trying to find that common ground and trying to find, where can, and sometimes it doesn't always look like one side giving a little. Sometimes it looks like each side learning about one another and finding out that we have more things in common than we thought. But really, I would say just looking to be better. How can we all be better? And serve our customers better, make things better on the farm overall, long term. And so we might have some differences in opinion on how we get to that endpoint, right? But we keep engaged in that dialogue and we learn from one another and we keep just exploring and looking for what that next best piece is. And so, I think there's, some uncomfortableness sometimes that comes along with those conversations. But I think it's important to stay engaged in them too.
Yeah, I think it's really important that two-way dialogue because I call them the antis, but I'm doing that in air quotes. But it's the people really who are unfamiliar with agriculture. It's just as important. It's important for them to learn about all the things that we're doing sustainability-wise. That is to help society coexist with large-scale animal agriculture or any agriculture, and it's really, really important for us in the industry to be sensitive to, or empathetic at least, to the concerns of all parties because they are our customers, and and there are more of them than there are of us telling a story.
Yeah, absolutely. I was out on a dairy this week, and they made almost that point exactly, Andrew, is, if we can't look our customers in the eye and that they're okay with it, then what are we doing? We have to evolve and adapt. And that doesn't mean, that we don't do some education or, those aspects like you talked about, but it's certainly a two-way street. And I know sometimes, some people might look at some of those entities that we're engaging with and think, why the heck are you talking with them, spending so much time with them? It's for all these reasons we've talked about, and I will say too, it has been fruitful. When I look at the overall picture, it's been fruitful, right? Like I have learned some things from them. They have helped me probably extend and help me learn about things, do some analysis, do some things that I didn't have the time or the capacity to do myself, right? And that also comes with a level of screening, right? I think everybody expects that you don't just blindly take what the opposition says, right? So you have to be actively engaged in that, and use some filtering and bring in other people from internally that are experts, in the lending and the credit side and our risk management side, all of those things. But definitely, try not to be an adversary, but figure out ways to work together.
So when you're looking at a potential loan, is sustainability ever a component for no or no go?
The short answer would be no, right? But that doesn't provide a lot of context. And some may hear that and say, well, what do you mean? And so as Farm Credit, and because we are owned by our customers, right, we have always been very careful of, we're not going to tell you how to run your operation. We're not here to set the rules on what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. However, we do see, that a lot of times these things that are in the sustainability realm, right, or even if they're not, that all shows up at the end of the day in that cash flow and the profitability of that operation. And so while we don't have a specific, like, well, this isn't sustainable, right, so it's in or it's out, those all have impacts on that profitability side, on the cash flow side, and on the business plan. And so it does flow in that way, where we do judge kind of a go or no go decision. The one caveat I would say is certainly where there are areas where things are regulated, dairies, beef feedlots, you have to have those environmental permits, right? And so you could say like that's an element of sustainability, right? That you have that manure management plan. And if you don't have the right permitting for all of that, that's a no-go. And so that's, maybe a little bit different way to think about, a go or no-go on a loan relative to sustainability.
Yeah, that's really important, that at an absolute minimum for someone to receive a loan, they have to be complying with all local, state guidelines and whatnot. And we are indeed seeing, and as I think you probably are seeing, how in addition to doing what I'll call the minimum, more and more we're seeing clients invest in, say, anaerobic digesters and things like that. And I suppose things like that are viewed favorably when Farm Credit would take a look at a potential opportunity.
Sure. Yeah. Like I mentioned, we want to be there to enable those customers that want to engage in sustainability. That's really our position, is we want to be there to support that, whether it is an anaerobic digester, or it is putting in roller compacted concrete into a feed yard, or it's adding in a new feed additive, or it's adding in cross fencing for rotational grazing, whatever that might be. I think at the end of the day, we want that to be successful, but we also just want to make sure there's a good business plan to go along with it and really support that economic sustainability side.
Absolutely.
Myriah, with all that being said, we know that a lot of different, everyone has their own view of sustainability. I'm sure the views of all the producers that your association works with differ widely, just as we see in our work too. But at the end of the day, why is it important for someone like Farm Credit Services of America to show up for your customers the way that they want you to when it comes to these matters of sustainability?
That's a great question. And, I think So if I go back in my own personal life, right? The sounding board that I have, and my dad and my father who run, our operation every day. If it doesn't work for them, we're just not going to get very far, right? And so as a lending institution, same applies. If it doesn't work for our customers, we're just probably not going to make it very far. And so it's been really important, that we listen to our customers and what they actually want on sustainability. So rather than, kind of coming from a top down and this is what you need and here's how we're going to apply it and here's how we're going to do it, we're taking the time to do some of that. I would call it grassroots, but listening. And so about a year ago, we started on a project where we surveyed um, several of our customers, but there are also folks from what we call 10 other lookalike states. So similar to the area that we serve. And some of those folks were customers of other farm credits. They were also customers of other commercial lending institutions. So really trying to get a broad sample, something that was statistically representative about sustainability. Where folks wanted a lending institution to show up what they were already involved in, what are some of their barriers just in general around sustainability, but also how they relate to financing and that economic side of sustainability. And then lastly, we put a few different things in front of them and said, what about this? What about that? Asking them about preferences and then exploring some future potential, ways that we might show up and seeing how they felt about those options as well. And so it was really interesting. I mean, I think that was probably just about the most excited I've been in this role. And there's been a lot of exciting things like when we got our first sustainability report out and got that done. That was super exciting. But getting even just this research back from the customers and seeing what they want and thinking about what we can create and what we can do from that, man, that was just one of the best days on the job. I'd never felt, probably so invigorated as digging into that research and seeing the ways that we could show up for our customers.
I think that's really, really important to do something like that survey. And I think most agricultural lenders probably do a decent job of listening to their customers and taking their thoughts into consideration when it comes to new opportunities. But like I said, I think that's so critically important because banker is not always a farmer or rancher's favorite word. Sometimes it may have a negative connotation for them, unfortunately. But like I said, I think most lenders have a really good relationship with their clients, and there's a dialogue there. But when it comes to these matters of sustainability, something that's new, emerging, upcoming, I would like to think that producers probably appreciate the thought and the time that Farm Credit Services of America puts into helping them understand what's available out there, serving as a resource, but also saying, hey, can you help us understand this from your perspective too? That's something that we have to keep in mind, not only in that lender and borrower relationship, but like you said, talking to the opposition, as Andrew put it, when it comes to people who may not be very pro-agriculture, or just listening to our consumers we may not always agree with. Dialogue's important in a lot of different contexts, and glad to see that the association is pursuing that in many ways.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I think that it might be kind of elementary that Farm Credit would do loans for, say, facility expansions and things like that. What type of sustainability related projects would Farm Credit finance?
Really just about anything under the sun, right? We've talked about that we're not trying to set the rules on what is or what isn't. Really, it comes down to the business plan, the cash flow, the profitability. Does it fit all of those things? And so we've talked about a couple of examples here today, right? I talked earlier about the solar panels on hog barns, right? Or a grain bin dryer. Those were all related to that Rural Energy for America program, or REAP. So we've certainly financed those. We had one feedlot customer who decided to put in some roller compacted concrete on a portion of their feed yard. We financed that. But we also know that we're, financing other things like no-till drills. And so it really runs the gamut on what we will finance. And we've had this question before about, do you even, or what do you finance in sustainability? And so we did a little exercise internally, and that can be pretty hard to even wrap our arms around as an organization. Because if you think about it, somebody comes in and they want to get an operating line of credit, right? They don't have to specify, they don't have all the specifics on what they're going to put that towards. And so that never necessarily gets reported back in. Sometimes we know it, right? But there's not as opposed to say like a real estate loan, a specific thing where we know where that's going towards. So we did a little exercise in a portion of our portfolio to see if we could figure some of that out. We asked our credit underwriters, they put that information together. We saw that there was a lot around solar and energy efficiency. But at the one point of interest, I would say is, I mentioned this customer that put in some roller compacted concrete. I got this list back. Here's the types of things that we financed that were relative to sustainability. And again, they were looking at loan specific, for a project. And I said, where's that loan for the roller compacted concrete? I know we did it. I know they financed it. Like I've talked to the feed yard customer about it. And so they went back and did some digging. They said, oh, they put that in their operating line of credit. That's why it didn't show up. That's why it wasn't there. Because it wasn't a loan only for roller compacted concrete. And so you could think about feed additive being the same way, right? So, that would be rolled up into an operating line of credit. So we're not doing a loan specific to a feed additive like a Bovaer relative to sustainability. So those things are a little bit hard for us to get our arms around and count, I would say, and tabulate. But we know that there's a lot of that going on in our portfolio because of the conversations that we have with our customers. And so really when it comes to, what will we or will we not, maybe finance and sustainability, I'm going to say again, it all comes down to that business plan, profitability, the cash flow, all of those things, and making sure that economic sustainability, that soundness is there in any of those projects.
So you mentioned Bovaer. So Bovaer would not have necessarily a return as would, say, solar panels on top of a barn or grain bin or anaerobic digestion system or a no-till drill. How does Farm Credit kind of like reconcile making or allowing that spend to happen when it doesn't have a payback per se?
Sure. And that's probably where we've had a lot of conversations in the industry, and we're trying to look for some of those right partnerships. And so that would fall back to that enablement conversation of how can we enable our customers to do something like Bovaer where there's not that, immediate return or that profit piece to it. And even we talked about those opposing organizations. Sometimes those opposing organizations, this is where they want to help, right? Because they recognize that there isn't that return. And so, asking about, well, can Farm Credit partner with, say, an agribusiness or a food company that wants to have, lower emissions on their footprint, if they put a little bit of money towards it, excuse me, and we pair that with the Farm Credit money, then can we make that make sense? Or if you can essentially pool the different sources of funding, that's a little bit of what we're looking at of how can we help those things get deployed.
Gotcha. And just for the people in town or the people on Wall Street, Bovaer is a feed additive for cattle that reduces enteric emissions. That is the emissions from rumination, primarily burping. That is the burping of methane or greenhouse gases. So just a little tidbit there. But thank you for that, Myriah.
Andrew, I think cow burps was a great topic to end on. So I think we'll leave the conversation there. And
yeah,
Myriah,
you should be just glad I didn't say cow burps and cow farts because that would have been really bad.
You just said it. So there it is, folks. Well, thanks again, Andrew. And Myriah, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and expertise having you here on the show. And I can assure you all of our listeners appreciate your time just as much as we do.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Myriah.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for choosing to spend time with us today here on Sustaining the Herd. We hope you have enjoyed the conversation as much as we have. as we've been joined by our guest, Myriah Johnson, who is the Vice President of Corporate Sustainability at Farm Credit Services of America, Frontier Farm Credit, and Ag Country Farm Credit Services. We look forward to being back with you again in a couple of weeks with a new episode. Until then, thanks for joining the herd today.